A rich man with no kids walks past a woman begging on the street, then sees her 3 little boys, and they all have his eyes. He thinks it's just a strange moment until one of them calls him Daddy. This isn't a love story. It's a story about truth, heartbreak, and the family he never knew was his. Don't skip this because the ending will stay with you. Dear friend, what you're about to experience is not just a story, it's a deeply human journey about lost resilience and the quiet, unexpected ways love finds us when we need it most. If this is your first time here, I invite you to drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing your voice. And if you're someone who believes in second chances, in the hidden strength of ordinary people, and in stories that stay with you long after they end, consider subscribing and tapping the bell icon. We share moments that matter. Thank you for being part of this one. Now, let's begin. It was just after 10 p.m. in downtown Chicago. The city pulsed with neon, the elevated train thundered overhead, and in a high-rise boardroom 40 floors above the lights of Michigan Avenue, a man stared at a medical report that shattered everything. Julian Whitaker had built an empire from code vision and sleepless nights. At 42, he was a tech mogul, a keynote regular, the type of man whose schedule was booked 3 months in advance, except tonight something had unraveled. And he couldn't think, couldn't breathe. Not with those words echoing over and over in his skull, irreversible infertility due to post-trauma complications. 5 years ago, a drunk driver had blown through a red light in San Francisco and slammed into Julian's Tesla. He walked away with a broken leg and a bruised lung. Or so he thought. But it turned out the worst damage wasn't visible. It was silent. And permanent. Tonight, that silence roared. He left the office without a word, telling his assistant to cancel the car. He needed to walk to feel the air. Maybe just get lost for a while. His feet wandered to familiar streets past the Chicago Riverwalk across the bridge under the glow of the Tribune Tower. And as he passed the gold-lit entrance of Morton's Steakhouse, something made him stop. It wasn't the smell of ribeye or the laughter of patrons. It was a woman. Thin, pale knees tucked against her chest. A coat 2 sizes too big swallowed her small frame. Her hair was limp, her cheeks hollow, but her posture said, "Don't pity me." Next to her were 3 boys, triplets. They looked no older than 6. One rubbed his eyes, another clutched a battered toy dinosaur with a missing limb, and the third, the smallest, just stared at Julian. Unblinking. Blue eyes. Exactly like his own. Then came the voice. "Please, sir. Help us." It was barely a whisper, but it cracked open something in him. Julian had walked past dozens of panhandlers in his life. He donated to charities, sponsored orphanages overseas. But this was different. These children weren't statistics. They were real, present, right in front of him. "When's the last time they ate?" he asked. "We're fine," the woman said too quickly. "No," Julian replied, "you're not." He crouched down, leveling with the boys. "Hey, I'm Julian. What's your name?" "Liam," said the first. Noah, the second, shouted. Caleb whispered the third. Julian turned to the woman. "And you, Emily?" She said, her voice cautious. "Emily Rhodes." "There's a diner down the block," Julian said. "Come with me, please." She looked at him long and hard. There was shame in her eyes and fear, but Liam tugged on her coat. "Mama, please." And just like that, her resolve crumbled. Inside the all-night diner on Clark Street, the boys inhaled grilled cheese and tomato soup like it was their first real meal in weeks. Julian didn't touch his food. He couldn't stop staring. The way Liam tilted his head when he was thinking. The way Noah drummed his fingers on the table. The quiet, observing silence of Caleb. They weren't just any children. They were familiar. "How old are they?" Julian asked. 6, Emily answered. They turned 6 in December. He almost dropped his fork. December 12th, exactly 9 months after that charity gala, the one where he and a young art therapy student named Emily shared long conversations and a bottle of champagne. They'd met once, talked for hours, and then she vanished. He hadn't thought about her in years. Until now. Julian offered them a warm bed for the night. Just for tonight, he told Emily. She hesitated. We're trying to get to Cleveland. My sister's there. Still, she said yes. Back at his penthouse in the Gold Coast, Julian tucked the boys into the guest room. They fell asleep instantly, curled into each other under thick blankets. Julian stood at the door, watching them breathe his throat tight. He didn't know why, but he felt something he hadn't in years. Hope. That night, he opened an old folder on his laptop, scanned through years of images from Gala's product launches, press conferences, and then he found it. A photo from the 2017 Whitaker Foundation benefit. He was standing beside a young woman in a black dress. Her eyes sparkled. Her smile was timid but sincere. Emily Rhodes. The same woman, no doubt. He zoomed in, his hands trembling. And suddenly he wasn't alone. He had 3 sons. Maybe. But why hadn't she told him Julian didn't sleep? He sat by the window all night watching the skyline. What do you do when a life you were told you could never have suddenly appears in front of you, hungry, cold, and looking exactly like you? He thought of Caleb whispering "Thank you, mister," as he dozed off. He thought of Emily, eyes rimmed red, tucking bread into napkins when she thought no one was looking. He thought of the loneliness that had consumed him for years, of the hope that had slowly died, and now how it had sparked again, fierce and confusing. And in that moment, Julian made a decision. He would find out the truth. He had to. But more than that, he wouldn't let these kids go hungry again, not under his watch, not ever. Because sometimes the things that break us the most are the very things that crack us open wide enough to let love in. And sometimes when you've lost everything you thought mattered, fate gives you something better. It gives you purpose. The next morning, Emily would wake to a question she didn't expect, and Julian would begin a journey not toward closure, but toward something far more terrifying and beautiful. Family. And that's where this story truly begins. The morning sun in Chicago filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting golden lines across the hardwood floor of Julian Whitaker's penthouse. The city buzzed far below, but in that stillness, Julian stood alone, coffee in hand, watching Emily Rhodes stir on the guest couch across the room. Her boys were still asleep, their breathing soft, and synchronized a quiet chorus that tugged at his chest. He hadn't slept. Not even a minute. Because now he knew. Emily Rhodes wasn't just a stranger with hungry children. She was the woman who had disappeared from his life 6 years ago without a word. And those 3 boys, they were almost certainly his sons. But the ache in his chest wasn't anger. It was confusion, sadness, and a longing to understand why. He walked into the kitchen just as Emily began folding the blanket that had covered her the night before. Her hair was pulled into a loose braid, her eyes puffy from sleep, or maybe from crying. She looked up, startled to see him. "You don't have to go," Julian said softly. "Not yet." Emily swallowed hard. "I told you, we're headed to Cleveland." "Emily," he said, voice low. "You don't remember me, do you?" There was a beat, a flicker of something behind her eyes. Recognition. And then she looked down at the floor. "I remember," she whispered. Julian stepped closer, the city forgotten behind him. "Why didn't you tell me?" She laughed, short, sharp, bitter. "You think I didn't want to. Julian, your mother found me, 2 weeks after the gala. The air shifted. She came to my apartment. Emily said, her voice trembling now, said I was a gold digger, that you were too important to throw your future away. She had 2 men with her lawyers. They gave me a check and a warning. Julian's stomach turned. She said if I ever tried to contact you, she'd ruin my life. Make sure I lost everything. Why didn't you fight? He asked, more desperate than angry. Emily looked toward the guest room toward her sons, because I found out I was pregnant 2 days later. The room went silent. I couldn't risk it, she whispered. I had no job, no family, no home. Just 3 lives growing inside me. I didn't run from you, I ran for them. Julian felt his knees weaken. He sank into the chair across from her, running a hand over his face. His mother, Vivienne, had done what he always feared she would chosen, legacy over love, image over truth. He thought back to those years, the phone calls that never got returned, the investigators he'd hired, the nights he stood on his balcony asking the wind why it all ended without explanation. All this time, Emily had been hiding to protect his children from the same woman who had tried to control every moment of his life. Are they mine? He asked, voice barely above a whisper. Emily's eyes met his. They were wet but unflinching. Yes. He closed his eyes. The weight of that word settled over him like a second skin. Yes. He had sons. 3 beautiful, brilliant boys. And he'd missed everything. Their first words, their first steps, every skinned knee, every birthday. I'm sorry, she said, and this time her voice cracked. I thought I was doing the right thing. He stood, walked to the guest room door and looked in. Liam was curled up. Noah sprawled out, Caleb hugging that same broken dinosaur. I don't want to miss another day, Julian said. Emily stood beside him. Neither do I. But this wasn't simple, and both of them knew it. That afternoon, Julian called Grant Holloway his best friend since college, now his attorney. He laid out everything, the chance meeting the boys, the truth about Vivienne. We need to make this official, Julian said. DNA tests, custody rights, all of it. Grant nodded. You sure you want to go public? There's going to be backlash. I'd rather face backlash than spend one more day pretending I don't have a family. That evening, while Emily prepared dinner and the boys built a Lego castle, Julian sat in his study, staring at a framed photo of himself at 23, standing beside his mother at the launch of his first company. He couldn't help but wonder who might he have become if he had grown up with a father who chose love over legacy. He would be that man now. Later, as the boys drifted to sleep, Julian sat with Emily on the balcony. The night air was cool. She wore one of his sweaters, oversized and soft, the sleeves hanging past her hands. I should have fought harder, Julian said. You're fighting now, Emily replied. And then she did something he hadn't expected. She reached into her worn backpack and pulled out a folded paper. It was a drawing. 3 stick-figure boys standing beside a tall man with glasses and messy hair. He's in all their pictures, she said, even when they didn't know his name. I think they've been waiting for you. Julian stared at the drawing, the lump in his throat growing. They deserve to know their father, Emily added, and I want to know him again, too. Julian didn't respond with words. He simply reached for her hand. Because some truths break your heart, and some truths when faced can put it back together piece by piece. Tomorrow the battle would begin. But tonight something had been rebuilt. Not with contracts or DNA tests, but with trust. And just down the hall, 3 small hearts slept soundly, unaware that everything was about to change. Vivienne Whitaker arrived at 10:06 a.m. unannounced and uninvited. She stepped into Julian's penthouse like she still owned the world. Her tailored lavender coat was spotless. Her hair set in place with the kind of precision that made even chaos seem curated. But beneath the pearls and polished heels was a mother who hadn't just crossed a boundary, she'd detonated it. Emily froze when she saw her. The boys were in the next room playing with blocks on the floor, unaware of the storm gathering in the kitchen. Vivienne removed her gloves with slow precision, laid them across the counter, and spoke as if this were a business negotiation. "I'm here for the boys," she said. Emily stepped in front of her, protective and steady. "They're not yours to claim." Vivienne's smile never touched her eyes. "Everything with my name is mine." From the hallway, Julian's voice rang out sharp and immediate. "Get out!" His mother turned to him, eyes wide with mock surprise. "Julian, darling, I came to resolve things." "No, you came to erase them." Vivienne glanced at Emily. "You're smarter than I thought, still using my son's guilt like a leash." Emily's hands trembled slightly, but she stood firm. "I'm not here to fight," Vivienne said, pulling a folded check from her purse. $2 million. That should be enough to get you far from here. Disappear again. Emily didn't even glance at the number. "You think I haven't seen that trick before?" Vivienne stepped closer, lowering her voice to a venomous whisper. "You are a footnote, Emily. My son will forget you again. But if you stay, I will fight you in court, and I will win. You'll lose everything." Julian stepped between them. "No," he said. "She won't. Not this time." The tension was thick, choking. And in that moment, Julian saw his mother not as a parent, but as a power broker, someone who believed love was leverage family, a currency. That night, Julian called Grant Holloway. "She tried to buy them away again," he said. "I'm done playing nice." Grant arrived with a folder. Inside, financial documents, old transfers from the Whitaker corporate accounts, lavish personal spending disguised as philanthropic expenses. Private jets billed as research travel. Personal stylists labeled as image consultants. "She's been laundering money through your foundation," Grant explained. "It's not criminal yet, but the optics are bad, very bad." Julian stared at the numbers. "We use this." "You sure?" Grant asked. "This won't just hurt her reputation, it will end her. She already ended 6 years of my life." And so they drafted the ultimatum: resign from the board, surrender all voting shares, and issue a public statement relinquishing control. In return, they'd bury the file. 3 days later, the news leaked anyway, but not about the finances. Miles Tran, CEO of a rival tech firm, had gotten wind of Julian's situation. A mysterious woman. Triplets. Rumors of illegitimacy. It was front-page gossip by morning. Julian's phone exploded with calls. His inbox flooded. And worst of all, investors panicked. The Whitaker stock dropped 6 points in one afternoon. The next day, Julian walked the boys to school himself. Caleb held his hand tightly while Liam and Noah skipped ahead. Outside the school gates, a cluster of cameras waited like wolves. "Mr. Whitaker, is it true those children are yours? What about your board seat? Are you hiding paternity?" Julian turned, knelt to kiss Caleb's forehead, and then faced the cameras. "They're my sons," he said, "and I'm not hiding anything. I'm proud of who they are, and I'm proud to be their father." The clip went viral. Comments poured in, some cruel, many kind. But among all the noise, something happened no one expected. The stock rebounded. Not because of damage control, but because people saw a man standing up for his children. That night, the boardroom at Whitaker Innovations was silent as Vivienne entered, flanked by 2 corporate attorneys. She took her seat at the head as always. Julian didn't wait. "We're not here to negotiate. You've seen the numbers. You know what comes next if this file goes public." Vivienne folded her hands. "I built this company, and I'm trying to keep it standing," Julian replied. "But I won't let you destroy my family to protect your image." She didn't argue. She simply opened the file, signed her name, and slid the shares across the table. When she rose to leave, her voice dropped. "Someday, they'll know what you've taken from me. "No," Julian said quietly. "They'll know what I protected them from." That night, back at the penthouse, Emily sat with Julian in the kitchen. The boys were asleep. The world was quiet again for now. "You didn't have to do all this," she whispered. He leaned in, kissed her knuckles. "I didn't lose my family to gain a company. I built a company to protect the family I didn't know I had. There was no dramatic music, no applause, no parade. Just two people in a quiet kitchen healing what was broken with soft words and steady hands. Some battles aren't won with louder voices or sharper weapons. They're won when someone finally says enough, and means it." But even as calm settled over them, another shadow waited just beyond the horizon. Because legacies aren't just inherited, they're questioned. And sometimes redemption starts when you let the past crumble, brick by brick. The courthouse was cold sterile and humming with quiet urgency. Yet, in the back row beneath the high ceilings and faded portraits of old judges, Julian sat with Caleb asleep on his chest, Liam curled against his side, and Noah doodling quietly in a coloring book beside them. Emily sat just a step away, her hand brushing his every few minutes, a tether of silent reassurance. They had just filed for joint custody. The DNA results had come back days earlier, sealing what their hearts already knew. Julian Whitaker was the biological father of all three boys. Still, the paperwork had to be filed, the hearings scheduled, the statements signed. But what made Julian tremble wasn't the law. It was the sudden intimacy of the ordinary. School drop-offs, packing lunches with 3 very specific sandwich requests, folding mismatched socks while the boys raced through the hallway in capes. He had faced corporate raids, hostile takeovers, televised interviews under pressure. None of it had prepared him for a 3 a.m. fever. Caleb's tiny hand clutching his whispering, "Don't leave Daddy." That moment, more than any boardroom victory, redefined what power meant to him. After the custody hearing, life didn't slow down, it swelled. Julian traded quarterly reports for school newsletters, financial forecasts for calendar reminders about show and tell. He learned which cereal Caleb hated, how Noah hummed when he read, and that Liam insisted every toothbrush had a name. His was Captain Mint. One afternoon, while reorganizing the guest bedroom closets, Julian found himself on the floor with Liam buried under a sea of Legos and abandoned action figures. The boy looked up, suddenly serious. "Did you always want to be a daddy?" Julian paused. "I didn't think I could be." Liam tilted his head. "Because of your job." "No," Julian said gently. "Because of something that happened to my body. Doctors told me I couldn't have kids. It made me really sad." Liam frowned, then took Julian's hand in his own. "But we're here." And somehow, that made more sense than any medical file ever could. A week later, they were back in a hospital, but this time, not for paperwork. Caleb had come down with a persistent cough that worsened quickly. By morning, he was struggling to breathe. Emily bundled him into the back seat, panic etched into every movement. At the hospital, Julian never left Caleb's side. Through the blood draws the oxygen masks, the long, silent hours under fluorescent lights, he stayed. Holding the boy's hand, whispering stories, brushing sweaty hair off a burning forehead. "I'm scared," Caleb murmured once, barely audible. Julian leaned in. "I am, too, buddy, but I'm not going anywhere. You hear me?" He said it over and over like a prayer. By the second day, the fever broke. It wasn't life-threatening, the doctors said, just an aggressive respiratory virus. But to Julian, the terror had been real, primal. He realized in that sleepless stretch of hours that being a father wasn't just about DNA or paperwork. It was showing up, especially when it was hardest. That evening, when Emily returned from getting clean clothes for the boys, Julian took her hand and led her outside. The hospital garden was quiet, dotted with winter blooms and dim fairy lights. "I thought I was ready for this," he said. And maybe I wasn't. But something changed when Caleb looked at me and called me Dad. Emily's eyes glistened. He doesn't do that with anyone but Liam and Noah. Julian reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I don't want to keep protecting you from the sidelines. I don't want to be a part-time father or a temporary miracle. I want to build something real." He opened the box. 3 sapphires the exact blue of each boy's eyes. "Emily Rhodes," he said, his voice cracking. "Will you marry me?" She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She just nodded, tears spilling freely, and whispered, "You didn't just find us, Julian. You came home. They didn't rush the wedding. There was still healing to do. But they celebrated the engagement quietly with pancakes, pajamas, and a living room fort made of couch cushions." The boys cheered when Julian told them. Caleb hugged his leg like a tree trunk and whispered, "Does this mean you'll always stay?" Julian picked him up and held him tight, forever and always. That weekend, Sister Agnes visited. She was older now, her silver hair tucked beneath her veil, her gait slower. But her eyes still held warmth, the same warmth that had once given Emily shelter during the scariest nights of her life. They shared tea in the sunroom. The boys played outside, their laughter drifting through the windows. "I remember when she came to the shelter," Sister Agnes said softly, "scared, alone, pregnant with no idea what came next. But she had fire, even then." Julian nodded, watching Emily refill juice cups in the kitchen. "She saved their lives," he said, "and maybe mine too." Before she left, Sister Agnes pressed a small wooden cross into Julian's hand. "Love doesn't ask to be earned," she said. "It simply asks to be honored." That night, Julian tucked the boys into bed. Liam asked about planets. Noah wanted 2 bedtime stories. Caleb simply held his hand and stared at the ceiling. "Did you ever get scared when you were a kid?" he asked. "All the time," Julian admitted. "What did you do?" "I waited for someone to remind me I wasn't alone." "Did they come?" Julian squeezed his hand gently. "Not always. But I'll come for you. Always." And in that moment, in a quiet room filled with soft breathing and safety, Julian made a vow, not in front of a crowd, not in a courtroom, but in the sacred stillness of family, to show up, to protect, to love without conditions or contracts. The next morning brought new laughter, spilled milk, lost socks, and a broken lamp. But it also brought something else. Joy. And for the first time, Julian stopped measuring his success in profits or press coverage. He measured it in moments, in giggles, in spilled juice, in sleepy goodnights, because building a life didn't require a blueprint, just a promise and a willingness to keep it. The new house sat at the edge of Lake Michigan, just north of Evanston, where the air was fresher and the nights hummed with the sound of water lapping gently against the shore. It wasn't a mansion. It didn't need to be. It was a craftsman-style home, with a wide front porch, creaky steps, and a backyard that stretched toward a patch of trees begging for tire swings and forts. Julian hadn't chosen it for status. He'd chosen it for the sound the wooden floors made when Liam raced through the hallway, for the light in Emily's eyes when she saw the sunroom and imagined art classes with neighborhood kids, for the way Caleb sat cross-legged for hours beneath the elm tree out back sketching the clouds. It was finally a place to grow. The triplets had flourished in the quiet. Liam joined a robotics club and built a paperclip robot that could walk across the kitchen table. Noah, now obsessed with music, practiced piano every evening until his fingers were sore. Caleb had developed a love for astronomy, taping glow-in-the-dark constellations above his bed and naming each one after his family. Emily opened her first community art studio 2 blocks from their house. It was a converted bookstore, still smelling faintly of paper and glue. Kids came from every corner of the city, some quiet, some angry, some aching. Emily met them all with color and kindness. Julian split his days between home and a modest office in town. He stepped back from Whitaker Innovations, letting a new CEO take over while he focused on the parts of life he'd once neglected. He still held shares, still advised, but now his calendar had new entries: Caleb's stargazing night, Liam's robot battle, Noah's spring recital. One Saturday morning they gathered in the backyard for something simple but sacred: a tree planting. Julian had bought a young oak, strong and slender. He dug the hole himself, sleeves rolled, hands blistering. Emily prepared a time capsule box for the boys to fill small tokens representing what had brought them here. Liam placed a rubber band from his robot's first motor. Noah tucked in a sheet of music with a single sentence: "This was the first song I played when we moved in." Caleb quietly offered a smooth black stone, the same one he'd held the night he was in the hospital. "It helped me feel brave," he said. Emily added a paintbrush, the first one she used when she reopened her studio. Julian hesitated, then reached into his pocket and dropped in a tiny brass key, the last remnant of his penthouse. "This opened the place I used to live," he said. "But this is home." Together they covered the capsule with dirt, then lowered the sapling into the earth. Julian pressed soil around the base firm and steady, while the boys patted it down with small hands. Vivienne arrived an hour later, not with lawyers or threats, but alone. Quiet. Her coat simple, her eyes unsure. She had entered therapy months earlier. At first resistant, then reluctantly open. Julian had offered it not as punishment but as a final chance. Now she stood at the edge of the yard, waiting for someone to invite her in. Caleb noticed her first. He didn't run, he walked, measured small steps. "Hi," he said, looking up. Vivienne bent slightly. "Hello, Caleb, you've grown so much." He nodded. "We planted a tree." "May I see it?" He looked to Julian, who gave a slow, careful nod. And just like that, the boy showed her what they'd buried, what they'd shared. Vivienne didn't speak for a long time. She simply sat on the edge of the porch as the boys ran circles around the oak and Emily offered her a glass of tea. There was no grand apology, no dramatic reunion, just a quiet beginning, a choice to step forward. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low, Julian sat beneath the new tree, watching his sons chase fireflies. Emily leaned against him. "Do you think it'll survive the winter?" He smiled. "It'll take root, you'll see." She rested her head on his shoulder. "Like us?" He kissed her hair. "Exactly like us. Because what was lost didn't have to stay lost. And sometimes the most broken things, when held with love, could grow back stronger." The oak tree was small, still fragile, but it stood tall in the earth they had shaped together. And for the first time in his life, Julian didn't need a future mapped in milestones or forecasts. He had this, right here, roots growing deep, a family, finally, his. Julian Whitaker's journey began in a place of isolation. A sterile billionaire broken not by bankruptcy or scandal, but by the quiet devastation of infertility and betrayal. He had built towers of innovation, conquered markets, and mastered every room he walked into. And yet, in the dead of night on a cold Chicago sidewalk, it wasn't power or prestige that saved him. It was a mother with a broken coat and 3 boys with eyes like his own. From the moment he met Emily Rhodes and her sons, Julian's life unraveled, but in the most necessary way. The man who once thought he'd never hear the word "dad" became the kind of father who stood by hospital beds, memorized bedtime routines, and learned the language of Lego and lullabies. He faced his past, his mother's manipulation, his own silence, and refused to let fear define his future. Emily, once cast aside and threatened into disappearance, emerged not as a victim, but a pillar. Her strength wasn't loud, it was patient, protective. She taught her boys to dream even when they were sleeping in borrowed blankets, and she loved them through hunger, through danger, through exile. And when given the choice to run again, she chose to stay, to trust, to rebuild. The boys, Liam, Noah, and Caleb, were never symbols. They were never just a twist in a plot. They were the pulse of this story. Liam, the builder. Noah, the artist. Caleb, the quiet observer who saw everything before anyone else did. They brought light into a man's world that had grown dim with profit margins and public expectations. They reminded him that laughter could be a soundtrack, that questions were signs of trust, and that love didn't arrive in grand gestures, it showed up in the smallest moments. The conflicts they faced weren't fantasy, they were painfully real. The cold brutality of power, the weaponization of image, the generational tug-of-war between control and connection. But what makes this story endure isn't the legal wins or the public declarations. It's the tree in the backyard. That tree, planted with little hands and broken toys and promises whispered into dirt, is the heart of this narrative. Because love, when rooted in truth, doesn't just heal, it grows. Julian found his redemption not by erasing his past, but by facing it, by holding his mother accountable not with vengeance, but with boundaries, by choosing to be a father not just in name, but in the messy, exhausting, miraculous, day-to-day rhythm of it all. And through it, he learned the hardest truth of all. Legacy isn't what you leave behind when you die, it's what you build when you're brave enough to live with open hands. So what can we take from this story? First, that forgiveness isn't weakness. Emily didn't let Julian back in because he was wealthy or apologetic. She let him in because he showed up, consistently, humbly. Forgiveness in its truest form isn't forgetting, it's choosing to grow, past the hurt together. Second, that love isn't clean, it's chaotic and inconvenient and vulnerable. But it is also the most resilient force we have. It can rewire futures, it can soften hardened hearts, it can quite literally save lives. And finally, that healing isn't always about erasing pain. Sometimes it's about holding the pain gently enough that it doesn't break you anymore. Sometimes it's about sitting on a porch with the person who once hurt you and realizing that letting go doesn't mean losing, it means finally being free. In our world today, where image often wins over authenticity and conflict overpowers compassion, we need stories like Julian and Emily's more than ever, because they remind us that every life has a turning point. And sometimes that turning point is simply recognizing that love, not success, not control, not perfection, is the real legacy we're meant to leave. So, if you're listening right now, maybe ask yourself, where in your life have you chosen fear over forgiveness? Where have you chased power instead of presence? And who in your world needs to hear, maybe for the first time, that you're not going anywhere? Because in the end, none of us are too broken to love or be loved. We just need someone to plant the seed. Thank you for watching this story. If it moved you, if it gave you hope or reminded you of the power of second chances, we'd be honored if you subscribed to the channel. Your support helps us tell more stories that matter, stories about family redemption and the messy, beautiful journey of becoming whole. And if you've already subscribed, thank you from the bottom of our hearts. You're not just part of our audience, you're part of our family. We'll see you in the next story.